You know, he helped start this one channel called Telesur, and it's a news channel. It's supposed to be, you know, completely objective. It's not, but the advertisement for it says we're going to finally know ourselves. And you know, it featured a lot of interviews on the street where they show pictures of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and everyone in Caracas would immediately recognize them. But then they would show famous presidents and military leaders of Venezuela's history, and nobody knew who they were. And so, you know, in that sense, you know, he has been successful. He has stirred Venezuelans' interest in Venezuela and Venezuela's history. And I think, you know, down the line that can't be anything but a positive. So it's definitely a positive aspect of his presidency.
What were you said that all the opposition parties were joined together against Chavez. So did they actually have any specific policies? Or was it just that they were just sort of, we're not Chavez? Or, I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think that that's a huge part of it, and it's a huge reason why they were not successful with these elections. You had a lot of people who were, you know, in the middle, or were starting, you know, to take issue with elements of Chavez's presidency, but when it came time to vote, you know, they didn't, you heard a lot of people saying, you know, who else are we going to vote for? You know, there's these other candidates don't present a viable option for us. And so that was a major shortcoming of the opposition. And so they united in the sense that they tried to pool their vote into one candidate, but in terms of presenting a unified, you know, platform on which to move the country forward, you know, there was much left to be desired with that. And I think, you know, the campaign was too much about, you know, opposing Chavez and not proposing something else. And you saw that in the march. You know, the guy said, you know, we're not voting for, the most important thing is we're voting against communism. You know, he never said we're voting for Rosales because, you know, his platform makes sense and he's going to move the country forward in a good direction. It was, you know, we're voting against communism. And so I think that, you know, down the line, if they hope to have a successful campaign, which is the only way that they can take power at this point, they have to come back to the drawing table and really figure out, you know, how are we going to address poverty? Because, you know, in talking with Petkov, he said, the one thing that Chavez has changed forever, and this is undeniable, is, you know, he has made poverty the #1 issue in Venezuela, and no one can hope to challenge him nationally in an election without immediately coming to the stage with a plan to address that, you know, impoverished base in Venezuela. And, you know, again, that's another positive, I think, that Chavez has brought to the country.
Firstly, I think it's amazing you did that straight out of your degree. And second, I was just wondering why you didn't mention this sort of second coup d'etat when Chavez was taken away for a bit, because I have a friend who was the captain of the air army in Venezuela for loads of years, and he was saying the main problem was after that there was a huge brain drain because Chavez sort of sent the main, I don't know, the huge corporate leaders out of the country, and so all of the retired men or sort of people fresh out of uni had to get jobs at the top. And he said this was the biggest problem in Venezuela, and also the fact that oil production was stopped for, even if it was a few hours.
3 months.
Right, well then the sort of money drain.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, we mentioned it very briefly with the interview with Marta Harker, but the idea for us was to focus on, you know, 2006, and there's an Irish film out there called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, and that deals entirely with that coup attempt in 2002. And it certainly figures into any conversation on Chavez and why, you know, he's been in power for so long and been able to, you know, maintain support, because, you know, a big part of it was the opposition, and the CIA and the US really shot themselves in the foot and dug themselves a really deep hole, you know, with which they had no power over national, you know, politics or anything like that. And I think that forms the basis for a lot of Chavez's conversations even today. You know, people are raising very considerable concerns with this constitutional amendment, but the government's propaganda right now is based entirely on comparing the discourse now to the discourse in the months leading up to the coup. And I don't think that this is going to lead to a coup. I think that'd be the worst decision the opposition could make right now. But the government is still utilizing that mistake that they made 6 years ago as the basis for maintaining their block of support. The reason for not going into a lot of detail about that, one was again focusing on the year 2006 and not dealing too much with the past, but also a lot of people, especially in the States, ask us why the film doesn't deal more with the U.S.'s involvement in Venezuela. And again, while it's a very pertinent element to the conversation on Venezuela and Chavez's maintenance of power, in preparing for the project, we asked a lot of academics and people who've worked in Venezuela, on Venezuela, what sort of stories we should tell, what they felt needed to be told about Venezuela. And a lot of people encouraged us to look at Venezuela not as a country through the filter of foreign intervention, but to look at Venezuela as a country being run by Venezuelans and give it the greater reasonable doubt about autonomy and things like that. And I think that taps into what Chavez is talking about. And so that's the reason why we don't go into greater detail about the coup and about the U.S.'s involvement. While it's still a very important part of the conversation. I have to fly to Galway because the gentleman who produced that film on the coup is showing this tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to talk to him about how you transition from that story to this story.
Do you think that Chavez is like a modern day Caudillo, and why do you think that would be so important to the citizens of South America that they always have to have like a strong man in charge? Is kind of how history seems.
Right. No, I mean, I think it's hard to compare Chavez to anyone from the past, because I think he's his own person. The Venezuelan situation is very unique, and a big part of that equation is oil. That's how you distinguish Chavez from a Fidel or even a Perón. And so you have to look at Chavez and his maintenance of power again by touching on the issues like the world energy market and things like that, which would distance those comparisons from talking about Argentina in the past, or Cuba, or Chile. So I don't think the two can just simply be compared like that. I think what you do see now is you see leaders in Latin America kind of following Chavez's model. And so, someone was talking to me the other day. They were at a conference in Ecuador, and it was an academic conference, and Rafael Correa came to speak, the president of Ecuador. And he's a big supporter of Chavez, and is taking some steps to sort of follow Chavez's lead on some of the initiatives he's taken. But again, talking in a very similar way to Chavez. He was talking to 500 academics, and he was saying, this situation is not open to interpretation. You're with us or you're against us, and that's what he told these academics. And so that's how they're, that's going to again be very problematic down the line when there's no public space for debate on how you can reflect on the things you've done well or haven't done well. If you go back to the students in Mérida, this is an experimental stage. What's going on in Ecuador is an experimental stage, and they're both going to come to a screeching halt.